Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, but then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. Well, we're going to start with this news from Akerna as they provide a new flash report for the upcoming 420 holiday, and they predict 420 is expected, or predicting that they predict 420 will bring in over 130 million in legal cannabis sales, becoming the largest sales day as compared to last year's 420, which brought in nearly 112 million and became the industry's largest sales day to date. This year's 420 would represent a 16% increase over last year's sales. As more markets legalize cannabis and more Americans become comfortable with the legal cannabis industry, these year-over-year increases are expected to continue. And it's worth noting that Akerna's projections have been fairly accurate in the past, and in certain times where they've projected a certain number, they've actually surpassed it by a few million, so it'll be interesting to see what happens this time around. But with 420 landing on a Wednesday this year, expect traffic to start increasing on April 15th, the Friday ahead of 420, and in total, the Friday to Wednesday period is expected to see cannabis sales figures above the $400 million range. So we'll look out for that. And there's a further breakdown by sales, what they're projecting from 415 to 420 if you just wanted to pause to check those out. On to the main news we were looking for is New Jersey does approve the alternative treatment centers that can start selling adult use cannabis. And so the award goes to Acreage, CCF New Jersey, Curaleaf, and Columbia Care in the south region of New Jersey. Verano takes all of central New Jersey, and then North New Jersey, you got GTI New Jersey, Ascend New Jersey, and TerrAscend. So unfortunately, Air Wellness did not make the cut. I suppose they did not have enough supply, but it's also ironic when they say, well, we're worried that there's not enough supply. Well, why don't you just approve everyone to maximize the amount of supply? But regardless, these are the MSOs that will get the head start in New Jersey, and so we finally got the news that we were hoping for. And so just wanted to share some snippets from investment firms on what this could mean going forward. And so firstly, we've got Camilo at BTIG on New Jersey and US Cannabis. So thank you, Todd, for sharing. So there's more information on here. As much needed and significant win in New Jersey as 7 alternative treatment centers are approved for adult use sales. Now, if I zoom in, it's too small, but just to touch on a point here, next steps for the approved ATCs include an operational assessment for regulatory compliance and the payment of the ATC's expansion fees, after which the ATCs will get their new expanded licenses. And importantly, worth noting, CRC Executive Director Jeff Brown stated that there is no 30-day waiting period for the ATCs to commence adult use sales. So once they get their confirmation and then they pay, it seems like they're good to launch. So that's obviously good news. So you can pause to read this whole snippet if you want. Otherwise, you can also pause to read this. And then so we do have other investment firms as well. So this is Roth on US Cannabis. So you can pause to read, but they provide an update. New Jersey, approval to launch adult use. So obviously they've been looking forward to that. And this is likely changing their outlook for the whole cannabis industry for the rest of the year. As we were anticipating, it just took a longer time than we thought. While Craig Hallum on New Jersey, re-accelerating sequential growth on tap as New Jersey regulators approve adult use cannabis. TerrAscend top beneficiary in their view. So you can pause to read if you'd like to know what Craig Hallum has to say. Then we've got Jeffries on US Cannabis, so thank you, Todd, for sharing. As Jeffries highlights New Jersey rec to finally start, obviously a sales boost, but also wider implications, so you can pause to read if you want to see what Jeffries has to say on this. So it's always good to get multiple perspectives and then compare that to what you already know and then potentially make a decision based on that. Very much worth sharing that the New Jersey Senate President Nick Scuteri will still move forward with oversight hearings so we can get an understanding of the delays that hindered the full implementation of the cannabis law in New Jersey. So happy to share this because at the same time, while New Jersey, Arizona, and New Mexico all legalized cannabis in November 2020, New Jersey, one of the states that focus so much on social equity, only launched 2 days ago. They waited so long, whereas we saw Arizona and New Mexico launch far sooner and likely, provided much more equal access to opportunity to a lot of the minority entrepreneurs and small businesses into their state. So it'll be interesting to see what he finds, but nonetheless, just happy to see that someone with the ability to do so is going to investigate the CRC for these unnecessary delays that we saw. And so some other news from MJ Biz Daily, the cannabis industry will add nearly $100 billion to the U.S. economy in 2022. Another reason why you want to end prohibition. When considering whether to approve a regulated cannabis industry, advocates often tout the broader economic benefits of the additional tax revenue created. But the beneficial impacts exceed just tax dollars, as the total U.S. economic impact for cannabis sales in 2022 is expected to reach $99 billion, up more than 20% from last year, and upwards of $155 billion in 2026, according to an analysis from the newly published MJ Biz Factbook, which you can access by grabbing this link, but I don't know if it's a paid or free resource or not. I didn't end up checking, but just to give you some context as to how it can have such a great impact, because think about it, the industry encompasses agricultural, manufacturing, and retail activity, adult use and medicinal. Mind you, no analysts will look at it as a health product yet, but in some markets, it's also included in events and hospitality, which tend to have even higher economic impact on other industries. So there's some more information, but you can grab the link if you wanted to read more. Well, I wanted to share this one as 5 huge economic impacts if cannabis is federally legalized from Money Inc. And these are obviously obvious at this point, but worth repeating. And so just wanted to share this snippet as you can pause to read why was cannabis banned anyways. And so there are many reasons for many people over time. But if we look at the history and compare multiple sources over time, the most logical conclusion we can come to as to why cannabis was really banned was, again, control, because it gave the US government the ability to assert a higher level of control over a subset of the population than they previously could have. As with the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920, caused a surge in the number of Mexican immigrants in the US who brought the custom of smoking cannabis with them. As a result, certain segments of the US population started circulating some very hysterical claims about the effects of smoking cannabis. And so with that, you call cannabis marijuana, and you make the Mexican people the scapegoat, the enemy. And much like today, you can push a polarizing narrative to create fear and manufacture consent through propaganda. And think about it, before the internet, you could convince everybody that the best natural medicine on the planet is evil. And that's how it was done. While the benefits for ending prohibition do speak for themselves, so if we do scroll down, what are the 5 economic impacts of the federal legalization of cannabis? Number 1, tax revenue. So you can pause to read if you want to learn more of how that is a positive factor in ending prohibition. Job opportunities, creates many jobs, and the U.S. needs as many jobs as possible domestically right now as they ship so many overseas. Investment opportunities, this is exactly what you and I are taking advantage of. And while my channel is still very small, all I can really hope for is that from now until uplisting, as many deserving people as possible can find my channel, use it to educate themselves, and then consider opening their TFSA or Roth IRA, or just invest in these companies if they're already aware, because in the future, these companies will certainly be worth a lot more than they are right now. And obviously the clock is ticking. And if you've watched my channel, we're getting to that tipping point. But that is another opportunity. And I hope especially as many people that were damaged by the war on drugs can also take advantage of this as well. Number 4, reduce crime. Obviously, if you stop giving the police a reason to racially target people or to arrest for cannabis, you're going to have a lot more instances of people dying or just consequences of unlawful arrests for cannabis. And then number 5, health consequences, obviously, because once people realize that this is a medicine and not something worth criminalizing, then they can change their whole viewpoint. So going forward, wanted to share this one from Shomp. So thank you, Shompsy, for sharing this article, just to highlight that New Mexico sold more than 9.9 million, so basically 10 million worth of cannabis in its first week of legal recreational cannabis. So this article does highlight more and how Texans are driving into New Mexico and helping drive this new round of sales, but nonetheless, just highlighting that new states that end their laws certainly see a lot of economic activity that benefits the citizens of their states. While Cleveland.com highlights that Ohio regulators want 73 new medical cannabis dispensary licenses to address the demand, more than double the current number. They should obviously open a lot more too. As currently there are only 58 dispensaries throughout Ohio, the Ohio Board Pharmacy staff are working on adding 73 new dispensary licenses, said Justin Sheridan, the board's director of medical cannabis dispensaries, at a Thursday cannabis discussion at Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law. That could bring the total number of dispensaries in Ohio to 131 or 132. But I think Ohio has something of like 8 million people, so you need probably 10 times that amount of dispensaries to properly supply the demand, depending on the outcome of a court case that could create a 59th dispensary from the first round of dispensary license. And when Ohio's first dispensaries opened in January 2019, regulators projected 12,000 to 24,000 patients in the first 2 years. They arrived at that estimate after looking at patient demand in Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New York. Should have looked at Florida. By February 2021, 2 years in, there were 136,000 registered patients. Today, there are over 252. So love to see that the patients have absolutely surpassed their early projections. In addition to more patients, some areas of the state have no dispensaries, including several rural areas in northwestern and western Ohio. In addition, some areas in southeastern Ohio only have one dispensary across several counties. And in 2020, a study found that 20% of Ohio patients travel more than 30 miles to reach a dispensary, which seems crazy. So it's good to see that progress is being made here. However, the timeline doesn't really give us a concrete one, as these days the Board of Pharmacy staff is reviewing and evaluating the winners to make sure they're compliant with Ohio medical medical cannabis law and regulations, he said. So hopefully we'll have an announcement on this soon, but nonetheless, they shouldn't stop at, 100 and whatever they end up adding on, 132. They should keep adding as many as possible, but also wanted to share that we got recent news that Ohioans will be able to vote for legal cannabis on the November 2022 ballot as well, along with Maryland. So very happy to announce that as that is coming. Well, we've also got this one from Beacon on Virginia cannabis. So wanted to share, as the Governor Youngkin, Republican, has signed HB 933 and SB 671 into law, the legislation reportedly makes a number of improvements to the medicinal cannabis program, including eliminating the requirement that patients register with the Board of Pharmacy after receiving a written certification from a registered practitioner. And the bill would also remove mandatory active ingredient ratio mandates for product formulations, which expands the technology that can be used in processing, and makes several other modifications that clarify the scope of producing and dispensing medical cannabis. The new law takes effect July 1st, 2022. And there are only 3 companies that are currently licensed to serve Virginia's medical market, which include Green Thumb Industries through Dharma Pharmaceuticals, Columbia Care, and Jushi Holdings. So if you're interested in companies that have access to the Virginia market, those would be your best bets. So on to some other news. As the U.S. Cannabis Council, just wanted to share this, as this does send some optimism our way. We're optimistic that SAFE will get across the finish line. This comes from Steve W. Hawkins, CEO of the U.S. Cannabis Council. And on top of that, it's very reassuring to get this tweet from Rep. Maxine Waters. And she is one of the chairmen that was appointed into the conference process for the final version of the America Competes Act. So she'll be one of the decision makers that decides whether SAFE stays in the final version. And so she released this Chairman Rep. Maxine Waters statement on appointment to Conference Committee for America Competes Act. And so just wanted to share what she added in here as an important snippet. And so something that she will be fighting for. Last, certainly, but not least, we've got the Safe Banking Act for state-regulated cannabis businesses. So we've got at least one of the conferee members very much for keeping SAFE in there, which is positive. So wanted to highlight that. On top of this, some other news from MSOs as TerrAscend Corp entered a definitive agreement to acquire a Maryland medical cannabis dispensary for $11.7 million, a deal that will enable the multi-state operator to complete a vertical operation in the state. So good job, TerrAscend, as this will give you access to Maryland, a state that has a functioning medical program that will launch for adult use, that will allow the voters to vote for adult use legalization on the ballot in 2020. They'll likely vote yes, and then so we'll see Maryland launch adult use in the coming years. While GTI announces that they plan to open Rise Mankato, its 77th retail location in the nation, on April 14th. And so they're happy to announce that it will open Rise Mankato on April 14th, and profits from the first day of sales will be donated to Habitat for Humanity of Minnesota. So just like that, happy to highlight that Green Thumb continues to expand in the state-led growth story, but also that they are giving back to the communities that they reinvest in. As last week's video showed, a new bill from a New York lawmaker saying that MSOs should pay way more to give back. They're already reinvesting to give back. So it's about time that the government picks up the slack and does their fair share of giving back. Well, lastly, wanted to share that Curaleaf signs an agreement with WB Canna Co. and Wellness, as they're happy to announce that its select CBD and Curaleaf hemp products will become available for the first time in the Caribbean markets thanks to a new distribution agreement with WB Canna and Wellness. I did not think this would be legal or possible, but this is news, so good job, Curaleaf. This agreement will bring Curaleaf's lineups of products from its eponymous hemp and select CBD product lines to customers in and traveling throughout the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Aruba, Bermuda, Barbados, Cayman Islands, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Jamaica, and Saint Martin, as well as additional markets in Latin America, travel retail, and the cruise and diplomatic channel. And so I don't know which of these countries are have legal cannabis laws versus illegal ones. From my understanding, most of them would probably be illegal, but I imagine they're very relaxed. But nonetheless, if you wanted to learn more about this, the article is below. So it seems interesting, but again, a new market that Curaleaf is trying to jump into and take advantage of early on. Well, I wanted to share this one from Sammy J. It's a great visual, a useful Viridian chart this morning highlighting the punitive effects of 280E on profitability and where MSOs would land should we ever see the onerous tax code repealed. And it also demonstrates why normalizing cash flow for those that paid and accrued is necessary to represent a fair comp. And so just wanted to share this MSO taxes with and without 280E. So it's a very informative visual to remind us how much more profitable these MSOs would be if they weren't penalized with the predatory 280E tax and treated like any other business in any other industry without the double standard that is taxed onto cannabis. And so the orange line represents tax without 280E, while the green line represents 280E tax impact, with the black line representing the total tax that they've had to pay. Now, I don't know why the discrepancy is between the top four MSOs here and then the rest of them. I don't know if it means some of these ones have paid more 280E in the previous this year versus what some of these MSOs still owe in 280. I'm not exactly sure, but mainly just to highlight that obviously without 280E, these companies are going to be much more profitable, and that makes them at their current valuations right now that much more undervalued, because once this gets changed, they're just going to be, making that much more money. And so I wanted to share this one, another one from Sammy J, investing in cannabis, just to highlight the big 5 US MSOs, 60% of the MSOS ETF, including Curaleaf, Green Thumb Industries, Trulieve, Verano, and Cresco Labs, totals enterprise value divided by trailing 12-month sales, 4.5 billion. So they're trading at an enterprise value divided by trailing 12-month sales of just 4.6x, and an enterprise value divided by EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization of 1.5 billion, trading at an enterprise value divided by EBITDA of 13.9x. If we compare that to the Canadian LPs, which make up 35% of the MJ ETF, some of the big ones include Tilray, Canopy Growth, Sundial, Kronos, and Aurora Cannabis. And if we just compare the enterprise value divided by trailing 12-month sales, LPs are trading at least double of what the MSOs are right now at 9.3x. Well, if we look at the enterprise value divided by EBITDA, MSOs are at a 13.9x. Canadian LPs are at a 100.2x. And so that obviously represents an increase of like 7 or 8 from what the US MSOs are at right now. But just to highlight, this is another up-to-date comp sheet. The Public North American Cannabis Peer Analyst, Big 5 MSOs versus Big 5 LPs. This is a fantastic resource that highlights the top 5 MSOs versus the top 5 Canadian LPs, the differences between them, and why the US MSOs are such undervalued assets compared to the Canadian LPs at these current valuations. And so more news from States Penn Live. I don't have a subscription here, but just wanted to highlight that 90% of Pennsylvanians agree, let's make cannabis legal. And so I know that there are efforts to get a legalization bill through the Senate, I believe, from Republicans, but also there are efforts to get this on the ballot for 2020 or for November. And that would obviously go a long way, as we would have Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania. If we can get on top of that from now until then, I will update you, but that would be great. And we're getting in that direction with the support. While Marijuana Moment highlights that 7 in 10 North Carolina voters back medical cannabis legalization as Senate reform bill remains stalled. So the survey from WNCT, The Hill, and Emerson College found that 68% of voters believe cannabis should be legalized for medicinal purposes, a finding that comes as lawmakers have stalled on a Senate reform bill that cleared 3 committees last year. Only 19% of respondents said that they were against medical cannabis legalization, and with respect to adult use cannabis policy, voters are largely divided, with 48% in favor of the broader reform and 43% against it. That's a slight drop from the last time the survey put the question to voters, but nonetheless, North Carolina is a very red state, so we can start with medical and then ease our way into adult use. But good job as those in North Carolina are switching their views to match reality, while North Dakota activists file new cannabis legalization initiative for 2020 ballot. As the new approach, North Dakota measures would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and grow up to 3 plants for personal use. Its provisions largely mirror the House-passed legalization bill that was ultimately rejected by the Senate. As the coalition backing the new measure includes former law enforcement, a state lawmaker, local advocates, and the National Cannabis Policy Project, which has been behind numerous successful reform initiatives, while the petition filed with the Secretary of State must now undergo a review with that office, as well as with the Attorney General, before being potentially approved for signature gathering. So still early on, but more information here if you wanted to pause to read to learn about that. But lastly, wanted to share some other interesting insights. As Insider shares, Amazon says New York union organizers gave workers weed to help secure unionization votes. Now, I don't know much about the story, nor do I really care a whole lot, but sometimes you just got to give the people what they want in order to get what you need. And so obviously Amazon doesn't seem very happy. They are challenging the vote and filed several new objections Friday. Among other things, the company complained that unionizers gave weed to workers ahead of the vote. But hey, regardless, Amazon, maybe then you just need to pick up the amount that you're spending on lobbying to end cannabis prohibition sooner than later, so that this will not matter for your employees. Now, on to some studies, as obviously wanted to share the good findings that we've come across, as cannabis significantly reduces the use of prescription opioids and improves quality of life in authorized patients. Results from a large prospective study. So wanted to share the findings. This study provides an individual level perspective of cannabis substitution for opioids and other prescription drugs, as well as associated improvements in quality of life over 6 months. The high rate of cannabis use for chronic pain and the subsequent reductions in opioid use suggest that cannabis may play a harm reduction role in the opioid overdose crisis, potentially improving the quality of life of patients and overall public health. And so one surefire way to reverse what the opioid epidemic started, deschedule the cannabis plant. It's as simple as that. Well, we've got another one from Wiley Online Library, as this one's a bit more complicated, but bear with me. Non-psychotropic cannabis sativa L phytocomplex modulates microglial inflammatory response through CB2 receptors, endocannabinoids, and NF-κB mediated signaling. And so what I got out of this, our data suggests that C. sativa phytocomplex and its multi-target mechanism could represent a novel therapeutic strategy for neuroinflammatory related diseases. And so from my understanding, cannabis does great work at reducing inflammation. From my understanding, a lot of diseases are caused by excess stress and inflammation. So this is why another factor as to why we ought to deschedule, so we can research into this further. But just to scroll down, as I did find one interesting snippet out of here. So we go down to the conclusions. And then so lastly, just to highlight, the most relevant finding was the effect of CSE in counteracting the LPS-induced downregulation of metabolic enzymes, possibly contributing to CSE in maintaining high levels of the endocannabinoids 2-AG and AEA, whose neuroprotective role is known from previous studies in 2006, 2001, 2011, as convincing findings have shown that activation of endocannabinoid signaling can repress microglial activation, which from a Google search told me was inflammation in the brain, and ameliorate or make better neurodegeneration in several neurological diseases. And so I don't know about you, I'm not a scientist, but when I read this, this tells me that cannabis is an effective medicine that we should be researching more and using for many other things. Because if it can show that it represses brain inflammation and it makes better neurodegeneration, which from my understanding is your neurons killing themselves, this is certainly a miracle plant and not a drug worth criminalizing. And so lastly, just wanted to compare that with this as Senator Cornyn of Texas. I'm convinced pot is harmful. It's premature to legalize it. Sorry, fella, but feelings aren't facts. And so sadly, while we still have some dinosaurs in power, I do hope that dinosaurs like this will not get voted in when they put their feelings above what is actually true and what we can test through data. The last few articles, just got this one from Forbes titled American Cannabis Consumers Eye Opportunities Presented by Legal Cannabis in Germany. I'm not going to go through this article, but you can grab the link below if you want to learn more about what's going to happen in Germany. But don't you think you should be letting the American people know a little bit more about the great American state-led growth story that's happening in their own backyard? Really seems like the American regime wants to do everything in their power to keep the American people poor and looking somewhere else where they, what's coming in the future, as opposed to the undervalued MSOs that are going to be the next tech companies by the end of the decade, I believe at least. And so lastly, wanted to share this one from Marijuana Moment. We are at a critical threshold for cannabis reform, Congressman says. And so while I'm not going to read this whole article written by Rep. Earl Blumenauer, if you're interested, you can grab the link below and read it yourself. But the stage is set for 2022, and I'm just going to read this main snippet. As he says, having fought this battle for decades, I'm pleased that the House of Representatives has done its job and set the table for success in the Senate and ultimately for the American people. And while I do believe that's true, the ball is ultimately in Schumer's court. And is he going to work for the American people and pass some cannabis legislation that's going to help the industry and, make America safer and, help boost the American economy? Or is he going to continue working for the big pharmaceutical companies, delay any cannabis legislation? And if he does that, I imagine the American people are going to show up in November and tell them how much they dislike the fact that he's done nothing from, February of 2020 up until the election, if that is the case. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.